The last thing the American First agenda needs is a stupid, pointless, unnecessary war with Iran.
Welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Since 9/11, the U.S. has spent trillions of dollars and thousands of American lives trying to remake the Middle East in our image. It's sad to say it out loud, but we have to. It hasn't worked. Many of us thought it would, but it hasn't. By every measure, our foreign wars have ended in dismal failure for the United States, however noble their intentions, and some did have noble intentions. Donald Trump was one of the rare Republican politicians honest enough to admit this. He said it out loud 3 years ago and promised not to repeat the same mistakes if elected president. And partly because he said that, he was elected president. Now something fascinating is happening. The very people, in some cases literally the same people, who lured us into the Iraq quagmire 16 years ago, are demanding a new war, this one with Iran. The president, to his great credit, appears to be skeptical of this, very skeptical. Iran recently downed an unmanned American drone. The president, speaking today, seemed to suggest this shouldn't necessarily trigger a conflict with Iran. Watch.
Iran made a big mistake. This drone was in international waters. Clearly, we have it all documented. I would imagine it was a general or somebody that made a mistake in shooting that drone down. And fortunately, that drone was unarmed. It was not, there was no man in it, and there was no, it was over international waters, clearly over international waters, but we didn't have a man or woman in the drone. We had nobody in the drone.
Are you still open?
Would have made a big difference, let me tell you. Would have made a big, big difference. I find it hard to believe it was intentional, if you want to know the truth. I think that it could have been somebody who was loose and stupid that did it.
So that's not nearly bellicose enough for the permanent foreign policy establishment in Washington, many of whom crave a war with Iran and see every provocation as an opportunity to start one. Senator Lindsey Graham, for example, says Americans ought to be ready to fight and die for shipping lanes on the other side of the world. Watch.
So here's what to watch for. If the Iranians follow through on their threat to start enriching again at higher levels, to basically take their enrichment program to a kind of a nuclear level in terms of a weapons grade production, Israel's in a world of hurt. So the best thing the president can do is stop that. And how do you stop that? To make Iran understand you're not going to let that happen. I think he should put their oil refineries on a target list, that he should look at sinking the Iranian Navy if they attack shipping again.
So in Washington, there are no real consequences for being wrong, and as a result, policymakers are. They make the same mistakes again and again. And it's certainly not just Lindsey Graham. At the New York Times, left-wing warmonger Bret Stephens is also calling on America to sink the Iranian Navy. Many on the left are for it. John Bolton cheers him on from within the White House. Bill Kristol nods with approval from outside the White House. None of these people will admit their actual intentions. They'll tell you they don't really want a war with Iran. That's a crock. They want a war badly enough to lie about it. That's why they're putting American troops into situations where conflict is inevitable in order to start a war. Everyone in Washington knows exactly what's happening. They've seen it many times before. Fred Fleitz is a former National Security Council Chief of Staff and former CIA analyst, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Fleitz, thanks very much for coming on. Why do you suppose that when you look at the polling data on this question, conflict with Iran, almost nobody outside Washington favors a conflict with Iran, and yet the entire foreign policy establishment in D.C. seems open to it? Why the disconnect, would you say?
Well, not all of it. I don't want a war with Iran, and I know that this president was elected to get us out of wars and not to start new wars. I think the president was right to pull us out of the fraudulent nuclear deal with Iran. But, you know, there's people saying right now that the president is responsible if Iran responds with violence because we withdrew from that deal. Well, that's a fraudulent argument, too. We don't stay in agreements because the other party threatens to respond with violence. The president has responded with restraint. He's given an opportunity to de-escalate the situation. I think he handled it right today.
Well, we're not de-escalating the situation by definition, right? I mean, we're sending additional troops to the region, which is the definition of escalating the situation. And we're doing it, as I think you know, because a lot of the people who are behind it would very much like to see an open conflict with Iran. Why don't we just say that out loud?
I believe there's strong intelligence of increased threats from Iran. But the president does not want to use force. He does not want to go to war. But The use of force is on the table if Iran threatens our interests. That doesn't mean the president's going to do this, but the president can't ignore clear intelligence that Iran is planning to respond with violence to his policies. This president's not going to give in to blackmail, but he does not want to use force if he doesn't have to.
But what's the point of all this? I guess I've lost sight of that. I mean, Iran doesn't appear to be a threat to the United States. And there's a lot of talk about how it is. I don't remember any Americans dying in terror attacks backed by Iran since the Iran nuclear deal. We're energy exporters now, so it's not clear why the Persian Gulf is at the center of our strategic thinking. We face a lot of other threats, namely from China. Why are we so focused on Iran? I'm confused.
I think those are good arguments. The president decided to increase our military presence in the region because of intelligence that Iran was responding to his policy to pull out of the Iran deal with violence. So he's preparing to defend our interests. That doesn't mean he's going to attack. And look, you've talked to the president about this. I've talked to the president about this. He's been very clear. He does not want a war with Iran. He wants a peaceful resolution. But unlike Barack Obama, where the use of force was never on the table, it is on the table with this president, but he's not going to use it unless he absolutely has to.
But you could very easily see this slipping beyond his control or anyone's control. I mean, we're trying to provoke a war. I mean, again, I don't think anybody watching this carefully is going to mistake it for something else. I mean, that's what's happening. We're pushing for a war with Iran, and I'm just wondering, like, what exactly would we get out of that? And when Americans are killed in that war, what will we say to their families? Why did they die? Because of what cause? I honestly don't understand.
Well, I think when you say we're pushing for a war, you're talking about all the president's advisors in the foreign policy establishment. The president makes our foreign policy. And you know the president does not want a war with Iran. I understand he told you that recently. I've discussed it with him, too. He does not want a war with Iran, and he's not going to let anyone push him into a war with Iran. But if Iran is preparing to attack our forces, commit acts of terror, the president does a responsible thing in preparing to defend our interests. That's what's going on here.
When was the last time Iran committed an act of terror against Americans?
Well, Iran was responsible for a terrorist attack of a bombing of a train. Well, it was going to be a bombing of a train from Toronto to the United States in 2011. Iran was also behind a planned attack to kill the Saudi ambassador to the United States, also during the Obama administration. But I mean, look, those may or may not be good arguments, Tucker, but that's not what's at stake here.
Right. So there aren't any Americans who've been killed by Iran in recent memory in this generation. So I don't. Again,
how about in Iraq? How about the IEDs in Iraq?
With respect, I don't understand why so much disk space is being devoted to Iran when there are all these other threats. But
it's the new intelligence that Iran is planning attacks against the U.S. and our allies. That's what's at stake here, not these other issues you've raised.
Okay. Mr. Weitz, thank you very much. Good to see you.
Good to be here.
Douglas Macgregor is a former U.S. Army colonel and author of Margin of Victory. He joins us tonight. Colonel, thanks a lot for coming on.
Sure.
I don't want to be paranoid, but I've watched this before. It does seem as if the president is strongly opposed to conflict with Iran. He knows it will define his administration. He knows that it doesn't serve American interests, but that people who work for him are pushing the United States into a position where war is very likely, if not inevitable. Am I imagining this?
No, I don't think you are. I think the president has had his first Vietnam moment. He was walked up to the edge, he looked into the abyss, and he said, no, thank you. He followed his instincts, thank goodness, and walked back. He has no interest in going to war, but you are right. He is surrounded by people in the Defense Department, in the chain of command, in his own National Security Council staff, in the State Department, who are absolutely committed to finding ways to attack Iran. I think the president understands that an attack on Iran would result in an all-out war. The notion of limited strikes is absurd. The Iranians would respond with everything they have because their economy is in ruins, their backs are against the wall. He knows that. He doesn't want that. So we should be grateful. At the same time, I think the president has begun to figure out wars destroy presidencies. War destroyed LBJ. War destroyed, ultimately, George W. Bush. He doesn't want to join the pantheon of destroyed and failed presidents that embarked upon wars that ultimately were not supported by the American people. And again, if the American people don't support it, forget it. We don't want to do it.
Exactly. And they don't. Is there some good reason to maintain this level of sanctions against Iran? Are we getting something out of that?
Well, I think the idea was to destroy the Iranian economy and to bring the nation to its knees. That's really not what we should be trying to do at this point. I think the president senses that there is now an opportunity for diplomacy, for a new approach to Iran that could de-escalate this set of conditions and produce a positive outcome. Look, this will ruin our economy if we engage Iran in a war. Iran will instantly have support from around the world. They will be the victims of this limited strike that is being discussed. The limited strike idea is sheer insanity. It will provoke a war.
Yeah.
Everyone, China, Russia, India, many European states will come to the aid of Iran. We'll end up with a larger coalition of the willing against us than we have seen in decades. I think the president's figured this out. He's got good instincts, but he needs to get rid of the warmongers. He needs to throw these geniuses that want limited strikes out of the Oval Office. The last thing
exactly
the
right.
American first agenda needs is a stupid, pointless, unnecessary war with Iran. And he knows that, so he needs to act.
As much as Brett Stevens and Bill Kristol would welcome that.
Yeah.
It's insane. I agree with that. Colonel, thank you. Good to see you tonight.
Thank you.